Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Soho Whisky Club. It's the first time we've done a Soho. Can you all hear me? Hands up. Perfect. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, George.
Normally that's a bit more rapturous. So yeah, welcome, well, to my home. The first time that I've done a Soho Whisky Club tasting here. But strange times call for strange measures. A big welcome to you all for a very special tasting, only our second ever masterclass. So the masterclass was a series, actually I was talking to, it was kind of an idea that I came up with whilst talking to one of the members who's in the corner there with Laura Ann. Me and Joseph were chatting about it one day, just saying how cool it would be to have a more in-depth tasting, you know, where everybody doesn't come along just to go and get drunk, but you get to whittle out those lot and you get to have the people who really want to delve into a certain subject. So it's more, I wouldn't want to put the word lecture onto it, but it's more focused. So our first ever one was with Davil Gandhi, that was at the beginning of this year, and he did a blending masterclass. I'd love to get a Cooper involved one day, and maybe some maltsters, etc., and delve into the sides of whiskey that you wouldn't normally see when a brand comes to the club. And we have a fantastic opportunity at the moment at Soho Whisky Club. It gives me great pleasure to announce that we have a new official sponsor for the Soho Whisky Club Terrace. And that sponsor comes along with many, many very, very cool bourbon brands, and other brands as well. There's an Irish one there too. And it's Lux Row, and part of Lux Row is the Limestone Branch Distillery in Lebanon, Kentucky. And Steve, do you call yourself the Master Distiller or the Head Distiller?
Yeah, just the Head Distiller.
Head Distiller. He's the Master Distiller.
Yeah, my grandfather and everyone from then back were true masters. So I, humbly just refer to myself as the Head Distiller.
Very humbly. So yes, Steve has very generously decided that he will accept our offer of doing our second ever masterclass. And the title of that is Beam 1795 to 2020. You can take from that more and more as the masterclass goes along. If you have a tasting pack, then you've got two beautiful bourbons. And I think really that's all I wanted to say. Yes, a few more things about our official sponsor, of course. We've got some really exciting tastings coming up, as well as this one. So we're thinking of doing fun stuff like movie nights and arcade nights, and then some more serious tastings. And we're going to have a lot of good fun with some brilliant brands. So I'm really excited. And also there might be a bottle involved, of which I'm very excited, but we will hear more and more about that in due course. But for tonight, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to invite from Florida, actually, not from Kentucky, from Florida tonight, Mr. Steve Beam, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you all for having me tonight. I really appreciate you taking some time to spend with me. One of the first things you become aware of and become appreciative of as a distiller is time. And so when people choose to spend some of their time with me, I'm very appreciative. So thank you for being here tonight. And so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the beams, and we'll start with just American whiskey and specifically bourbon, because that's what I know most about. And a lot of people ask, why Kentucky? Why everything ended up based out of Kentucky. Kentucky bourbon is known around the world. Kentucky makes, while bourbon is an American spirit, It can be made anywhere in the US. But 95% of the world's bourbon is made in Kentucky. And we like to say all the good bourbon is made in Kentucky, but that's a whole nother story. But it starts with Kentucky was the western frontier of the US in the 1780s, and Kentucky became a state in 1792. And from the late 1780s until about 1810, 500,000 people moved into Kentucky, which was, like, again, on the western frontier. And if people moved to Kentucky, built a permanent structure, and grew corn, they could get 100 acres for an absurdly low price. So you had all these people coming in, building structures, growing corn in this remote location. And so what do you do with all this corn? Because you can only so much cornmeal that you can make or feed to the animals and things. So, and the best way to preserve the corn and to add value to that was make whiskey with it. It was also easier to transport for trade. So a lot of the small farm distillers started popping up in Kentucky, and the basic route at that time was down the rivers. Kentucky, from what I've seen of Scotland, is a lot like Scotland, where you can't hardly go, 50 feet without running into a stream. And that's kind of the way we are in Kentucky. I've read it a couple times, and I've looked to document it, which I haven't been able to. But I've read that Kentucky has more shoreline, if you count the streams and rivers, than any state in the Union. So we were just blessed with all this water. And so that became not only an integral part of the distilling process, but also of the transportation and trade as well. So they would make they would farm all summer and grow the corn and harvest in the fall, make their whiskey in the wintertime. And in the spring, when the rain came and the streams rose up enough to take flatboats out, they would take their flatboats down with the whiskey and fur and ham and things that they would trade, and they'd go take it down into New Orleans. And it was quite an arduous trip. They'd usually do it in small bands of people. And so, yeah, and then walk back the Natchez Trace. It was about a 3-month walk back. So it was, quite interesting life in the frontier here in Kentucky. So the Beams came to Kentucky in 1792. Jacob Beam, and his name was spelled Boehm, was German, of German descent, but he was actually born in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, or Berks County, Pennsylvania, I'm sorry. So that's over near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, over toward the center of Pennsylvania. And so he was born there. When he was 9 years old, his father died, and the mother had 6 or 7 children, and she moved them to her sister and brother-in-law's home in Maryland. So Jacob grew up kind of in a bucolic life in a plantation in Maryland, where they were very self-sufficient. And being self-sufficient, one of those things would be, of course, distilling as well. And Jacob had an older cousin. Of course, at this time, people were migrating into Kentucky, and Jacob's older cousin, Josh Myers, moved out to Kentucky and started a grist mill and distillery, and was very prosperous. And Jacob was not the oldest. So at that time, of course, the lineage, if you weren't the oldest, you were out of line for inheritance. So he had no inheritance coming. And so he struck out to Kentucky to search out for his fortune. And seeing his cousin's success in the distilling industry. So he started a grist mill and distilling. So in 1795, he sold his first barrel of whiskey. It's called Old Jake. And he would become very successful. He had a son that followed him in the business. His name was David. Actually, he had two sons. A lot of people don't. So that's why I wanted to get in depth with the beams, because you hear the one side and it's rather kind of a flat story, but there's really a lot of depth to the Beam family. And so Jacob's son, one was David, who followed him in the distilling business. Another was Jacob Jr., who nobody ever talks about Jacob Jr. And Jacob Jr. married into the Weller family. And of course, Weller is another big bourbon name. And so he went off and went into the Weller family and became a distiller with them. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Steve, that first barrel of whiskey, that was corn, was it? 100% corn?
That would have been a corn whiskey, yeah.
And would the barrel have been charred?
You know, at that time, we're not 100% sure. You know, the first mention of bourbon isn't until the early 1800s. So it was probably not charred at that time. And there's a lot of theories on when the barrels started getting charred and how. But at that time, they were probably just putting them in pretty rough cut barrels and sending them down river. So
nice. And then off to Weller to make wheated bourbon.
Right.
So
that was Jacob Jr. And I didn't even know anything about Jacob Jr. No one even ever talks about him. And I was doing some research and I saw this headstone, and it was David Weller Beam. And I was like, who is this person? So I did some research on him, and he was Jacob Jr.'s son. He and Mary Weller had the son named David Weller Beam. And so, yeah.
Nice.
It's just it's interesting. The people in Kentucky, there's several different regions, but in the Nelson County, which is the Bardstown area, a lot of the families, are, married into each other's, either the Willets or the Dance and the Beams and Wellers, all of them. I guess because they socialized together, that their children would marry would be not odd occurrence just because of the social gatherings and things. But so Jacob's three grandchildren actually set three distinct lines in the Beam family tree. And I'm trying to go a little bit slow because it gets confusing. I don't want to just overwhelm people and with information, but I just want to stress, that there's so much more depth than just the one Jim Beam line. So Jacob's three grandchildren, all were distillers, and this would have been the early 1800s. The youngest, his name was John Henry Beam. They called him Jack, and Jack was quite the character from what I read. He was dabbled in politics. He was an extrovert, and he was very successsul with his distillery. He built a massive distillery. As the railroads came into Kentucky, there was less. They relied less on the rivers, so then they could transport through rail, so that they would build the distilleries on the railroad spurs. So he built a distillery, a massive distillery, modern massive distillery, and it was called Early Times. A lot of people don't realize that Early Times goes back, originally was a Beam distillery as well. And so Jack had the distillery. He had one son who evidently was quite the playboy, but they died within a year of each other. And so the Brown-Forman has owned Early Times since Prohibition. So, and that ended that Beam family line there. The middle son was David, and David was Jim Beam's father. And of course, we all know how that story ends. And then our ancestor was Joseph, and there wasn't really a lot known about Joseph. There's not a lot written down about him. In my research, I found a couple references that he was a distiller. Elmo Beam, who was the first master distiller at Maker's Mark, which would have been his grandson, referred to his grandfather as a master distiller in one of the quotes. So that was one quote where he had been the master distiller. And then a piece of information we turned up just recently, a cousin found the record where he had bought his father's still. So his father died rather young at an age of about 52 without a will. And his property was sold on the courthouse, at the courthouse steps at a auction. And so he purchased his father's still. So we know that he had the original, his father's still. So, because our cousins like to say that, he moved the still over here, and but it really doesn't quite work that way. But it's depends on whose story you're listening to, I guess. But we do have the documentation where he bought the still and some barrels and distilling equipment. And it's kind of funny because the Willets bought 5 barrels of whiskey. So it's just, like I said, all these names that come back and intertwine. And so he had 2 sons, and their name was Minor Case Beam and Joseph L. Beam. And Minor Case is who we named our Minor Case rye whiskey after. And I think this would probably be a good time to try some of that as well.
Great time to crack it in.
So the Minor Case rye whiskey, it's a 2-year rye. And to qualify for a rye whiskey, it has to be 51% rye. If anybody wants me to go into depth about what makes a bourbon and everything, just let me know. But for rye, it has to be 51% rye and 49% other grain. So this mash bill on this particular rye is 51% rye, 4% malt, and 45% corn. So it's on the cusp of being a bourbon. If the rye and corn were flipped, it would be a high rye bourbon.
Steve, a lot of people talk about how difficult it is to work with rye. At that kind of proportion, is it okay?
It is much easier to work with, yes. We do 100% malted rye, which is difficult, but not as difficult as regular rye because the malting, gives the enzymatic powers to keep it from clumping and things. But it does get real foamy, and it is a difficult grain to work with. Plus the yield is lower, much lower than you get from corn.
It's beautiful whiskey.
Yeah, so this is 90 proof. It's a 2-year rye, so it's a very young rye whiskey actually. And then it's finished in a sherry cask. And we don't get any trouble from many Americans when we say it's an American cream sherry, but the Europeans always freak out because it's an American sherry. So it's an American cream sherry. It was made actually in Cincinnati, Ohio. And the sherry is actually stored in ex-bourbon casks for about 5 years outside in Cincinnati, Ohio. When they dump the cask, then we put the rye in, and we age some a little bit extra. So for about 7 or 8 months, and then we age some for a shorter time so that we can blend it together so that we can maintain a profile that is the same each time. It'd be very difficult just to pull it out of the barrel and hit that same note every time. So we do that blending of the younger aged and the older so that we can hit it. We did the limited edition this year, which is finished in Armagnac cask, And that it was just finished 5 months and we pulled it and that was done. But this one, we have to hit a profile each release, each time we bottle. So we do that blending on that.
So that's the bottle that you just held up there is one of the hardest bottles to get your hands on in the UK. The Yellowstone Limited is so difficult. We've got
this one.
Yeah. It's just
This is a great whiskey too. So
virtually impossible to get your hands on, isn't it, Michaela?
We don't make that much. So and then when you spread it out across everywhere, no one state or country gets a lot.
Well, I just saying I don't have one. That's how difficult it is to get. So yeah, I can confirm that. And I'm watering down because, I'm a big fan of Yellowstone in general. But, I can just imagine the Armagnac finish, what you're going to do with it. So
yeah.
Well, one day, Michele, one day you can come to the Soho Whisky Club and have a dram of it.
Yeah, I don't want to promise. I'm gonna ask Steam Beam to promise that. We're gonna have a bottle to share. Okay.
Yeah, that might be if I ever get to travel again. It's so. Of course, there's so many tragic things, but so it's. I don't want to make light of that, but when things pop up and I see where like last year I was in London or I was here or there, and this year I'm stuck in my house. It's just, I cannot wait to be able to come back over and visit. So, because London's actually one of my favorite cities. And Michele has an extra bedroom now, so he better watch out.
Anytime. You can pay the night in whiskey.
Yeah, bring a bottle.
Nice.
So what are the thoughts on this? This is, like I said, the cream sherry. So you do get a little bit of some creaminess from that. There's some nice legs on the glass.
I have a question actually, Steve, in terms of the concept of it and coming up with it. Did you decide that because it was a rye whiskey, well, we can play around with casks? Or did you think I really want to do a whiskey in a cream sherry cask? And so there.
No, I experimented with a few different things before we settled on the cream sherry cask.
So you knew you were going to do a rye whiskey, and then you played around with barrels.
Correct.
Right. Nice.
Right. And
can I just add on that?
I'm sorry.
Can I just add something on that, because it's actually one of my favorite story behind Minor Case. Minor Case, it was like an unclosed chapter of your family. Is that right? Because there was already there the recipe of the rye. It was never finished. Let's say.
Right.
Correct.
So Minor Case. Yeah, I started talking about it, and then I didn't really finish. So Minor Case started working for his uncle Jack at 14, which was kind of this age everybody started working here. And at 28, he was considered a master distiller, and he bought into and then eventually bought a distillery in Gethsemane, Kentucky, which is not too far from where Limestone Branch is located today, on a railroad with a great spring water. And he was very successful. He had that from 1880s until the early 1900s. He sold the distillery right before Prohibition, actually, to my mother's side of the family, and we'll talk about them in a little bit too. But my mother's side of the family were Dance, and J.W. Dance started distilling here in Kentucky in 1836, and they were another family equally as impressive as the Beams before Prohibition. After Prohibition, most of them got out of the business by the 1940s and 50s. So that name had kind of disappeared, although J.W. Dan is still owned and sold by Heaven Hill.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Steve, hi. Hello, everyone. I don't know much about rye whiskey, but this is very nice. It's sort of fresh. I don't know. It tastes very fresh and sort of young. So I can kind of understand it's kind of a 2-year-old rather than something longer. So my question is, as a beginner, what should I be looking for in a rye whiskey compared to a bourbon? So I've tried various bourbons, but I'm not very, you know, how would you describe the difference between the sort of two, and what should I be looking for in a good one?
Right. So rye is generally more spicy than bourbon. And if you think of a piece of rye bread as opposed to a piece of cornbread or even whole wheat bread, you know, you get that spiciness from the rye. So a lot of the ryes out there are 75 to 95% rye. So they're very bold and spicy, and they lend themselves really nicely to a cocktail, and that's really what they why they kind of came back on scene was the cocktail culture. But there are some very nice ones for sipping as well, but they can be kind of punch you in the face as well with the spiciness and kind of, I think it's almost sometimes an astringency to the.
Should we all be making cocktails right now?
Well, this is because of it being 51% rye and 45% corn. You start out with a much softer and sweeter from the corn, and then the sherry adds those fresh fruity notes that you get on the nose, and then it follows through on the palate. So, for me, this is a whiskey that I always drink my whiskey neat. So don't put an ice cube in it for me, thank you. But and this is a really nice whiskey in the summertime in Kentucky or down here in Florida when it's a little bit warmer, because it's light, it's fruity, and it's just very nice on a warm day.
I think this is what I would describe as a breakfast whiskey.
There you go.
Anyway, okay, thanks.
Can I just what I was going with, you know, this unfinished chapter, which was something that you stopped doing, and I'm a big fan of it. And you know, if I find a bottle, I'm gonna buy anyway. There was something that you used to call minor case revenge.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to mention it, but you know, I think it's an interesting story considering then, you know, what we have as today as minor case as a finished product.
Right. So we started with minor case revenge. It was when we first started the business, you know, to make money and to have you know, an income. We did some of the moonshine and corn whiskeys and things. And one of the first things we did was a corn and sugar type of moonshine, which was 50% cornmeal and 50% sugar. So it was actually a cold ferment. So it was more like a rum, because all the alcohol was made from the cane sugar, and the corn was there for nutrients to the yeast, and then gave a really mild corn flavor. And then we barreled some of that up and used ex-bourbon barrels, and that's what we had for our first aged product, and we called that Miner's Revenge, because Minor Case, he died in 1934, just shortly after the finish of Prohibition, when it ended. So he didn't really get back into the business.
No doubt he was drinking along all the way through, though. Medicinal.
Yeah, well, you know, the Beam stayed in the business during Prohibition. My Minor Case's brother, Joe L. Beam, and we'll get to him in a minute, because he is a major player in the Kentucky bourbon story. But Joe L. Beam, well, he got caught moonshining once, and but it cost a lot of money, but they were able to keep him out of jail. I think his son went to jail for a short period of time. But so he got aggravated and packed up a distillery, and they put it on the rail car and sent it to Juarez, Mexico. And they opened the distillery in Juarez, Mexico. It's actually the Dowling family from Anderson County up by Wild Turkey. Actually, it's right there where Wild Turkey is now. And so they disassembled that distillery and sent it down to Mexico. And so he stayed in Mexico during Prohibition and distilled down there. My grandfather went to Canada and distilled there. And I heard one time, and now I've heard it for a second time from an eyewitness who said they saw, but they said that they took the distillery there in Gethsemane down and sent it to Canada and distilled in Canada. So I kind of believe that may have been where Guy was in Canada, that they actually took that distillery, disassembled it, and reassembled it in Canada, and he distilled there. So, and that Guy was my grandfather. And so he continued to distill all of his life.
That's incredible. I've never heard of people during Prohibition actually moving distilleries.
Yes.
Was that a really dodgy thing to do? Because I mean, obviously, a still is a pretty difficult thing to hide on a wagon.
Well, no, it wasn't illegal to move it off to Canada or Mexico. So, but yes, so those are the only two that I know of that were disassembled and moved, though. And I saw somebody ask where in Canada. It was Windsor, Canada, right across from Detroit.
And Steve,
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. I won't take it personally, George.
Sorry, mate. Sorry.
Steve, Aaron here. Thank you again for this wonderful presentation. What happened with that Canadian product? Is that still out there?
No, once Prohibition was over, they came back.
It all came back under the same
and most of that went to Al Capone, I believe.
Nice one.
Yeah, and it's funny though. There's another story, and I don't want to go off on too many tangents, but this is kind of a fun one. Joe L. Bean's miner's brother's wife, she was talking, cousin was talking, and she was talking to him, and she said, I really like that. I like Jack and Robert, she said, but I never really liked Joe. And she was talking about the Kennedys. And what happened was the whiskey that was being made in Mexico was being sent to the Virgin Islands and then up to Boston. So that whole tied back into the Kennedys as well. So I guess it's fitting that the cream sherry that's in the minor case was John F. Kennedy's favorite after dinner drink, and he had that in the White House during his administration. So it's kind of funny how that it all ties in. The mob in Chicago, and there's parts of Indiana where people met. I'm starting to kind of write a book, kind of a historical fiction book about the mob and the ties to Kentucky, and it all goes through this place in Indiana that was called West Baden Springs, which at the time is this huge hotel and gambling casino, and it was the largest glass dome in the world when it was built. And the distillers from Kentucky would take the trains up, and the gangsters from Chicago would come down, and yeah, a lot of deals were made, I'm sure.
Steve, we're here in London, so we follow your tradition. We have a bunch of gangsters who have their investments in the Virgin Islands as well. Sorry.
Yeah. So but it is interesting how that all played out. But so Joe, Miner's younger brother, he did live, through Prohibition, and he was actually one of the main people who were instrumental in getting the bourbon industry back in Kentucky. And that's another reason why it was then concentrated in Kentucky, because you had all this institutional knowledge of distilling that was based there as well. And Joe had 7 sons and my grandfather. So there were 8 of them. And all those 7 sons were out in all the different distilleries that were opening up after Prohibition. Everything from Stitzelweller to Heaven Hill to eventually Maker's Mark. We had Yellowstone, T.W. Samuels, all the different distilleries. And Joe would go, he'd kind of get it going, and then he'd leave his son in charge as the master distiller there and go on and help. It's kind of an interesting thing. Pappy Van Winkle, when Joe died, wrote the family a letter of condolence and, praised him and thanked him for getting the Stitzelweller distillery back up and running. And he said, except for that first batch, we made really great whiskey. And I always wonder what happened with that first batch.
Huh. Well, they probably just drunk it all.
Yeah. And so, but they were, like I said, he was instrumental in getting all those distilleries back open. And really, the tide of Mexico comes back around in the 60s because they did not close that plant in Mexico. The Dowling family had moved to New York by that time, and they were still producing this so-called bourbon in Mexico. And the American distillers were not happy because it was an inferior product and made less expensive, and they were unhappy about it. So that's when they applied for Congress to make bourbon a regional product. And so they had I think there was 100 senators and or Congress. And only one person was at the Senate, their congressman for the Dowlings in New York for bourbon, making bourbon a national product. So and that shut down the distillery that Joe had opened up in Prohibition down in Juarez. So
what do we think of this minor case rye, guys? Stunner, eh?
We like it.
Amazing.
We like it, George.
Very, very good.
So tonight you can jump online and you can buy it for £52.95 in your online forum. Okay, so just log in online and you can purchase that one, and you can collect in store in December, I hope, or I can send it to you. It's beautiful.
it makes a really nice Manhattan too, but you can cut back on the vermouth a little bit because the sherry works really well with the vermouth, but I would use about 2/3 the normal amount of vermouth in Manhattan for that, but it makes a really nice one.
Perfect.
And then double the whiskey.
Sorry, can I just take the occasion, because there is a lot of whiskey lover here, and it's it's an amazing group, and I'm actually doing a personal research because as ambassador of the Limestone Branch, I'm particularly proud, especially minor case, because I believe it's the only rye whiskey in the world, personally that I know, and it's 2 years that I'm researching another one that is finished in American cream sherry. I saw some finish in, obviously Pedro Ximénez, Oloroso, even some Palo Cortado, the rarest that I find, but not American cream sherry. So just if you guys find, if you know any other brand, just please let me know, because at the moment I believe it's more unique than rare as a type of brand. And, the extra smoothness and creaminess is definitely from, that special cask. But yeah, I believe it is a huge deal that it's American sherry, especially cream sherry. I don't know any other, so just put it out there.
Laura Ann asked earlier in the chat, and this is a perfect time to ask, what's the difference between your typical sherry, like an Oloroso or a PX, and your American cream sherry, or just a cream sherry?
You want to handle that?
Yeah, I can. I think I can. So I'm a big fan of sherry. I've been in Jerez, many times. Everything that is made in the Triangle of Jerez is considering, sherry. But then again, sherry over there is something that is defined by the category. Obviously, you got the main three type of grape, which is Palomino Fino, the Hydroxymene grape, and the Muscatel. But then let's say then with the Palomino Fino, you can do most of the dry profile. So you can start from, a Fino, a Palo Cortado, a Oloroso, and such. And then obviously the most famous, I believe, is the Pedroximene, because, it's that kind of dark, really sweet dessert wine. You go as well in San Lugar, which is the small island, Marzanilla, that is even more dry type of sherry. But when they say then you can only do sherry in Jerez, is because they're considering sherry as under those categories. So they will always say it's a Palomino, it's a Fino sherry, it's a Oloroso sherry. But when we say cream sherry, cream is an ensemble of sherry that you can do pretty much everywhere you like. There is here in UK, we're famous for Arby's Bristol cream, sherry, which again, is made in UK. So I believe the difference is if you can either do it or sort, type of sherry and assemble it otherwhere in the world. But if you do one specific kind of sherry, like Oloroso sherry or Fino sherry, it needs to come from Jerez. So it's more than one profile. It won't be dry. It won't be sweet. It won't be necessarily, like aromatic or, on the sweet side. It can actually have more than one flavor. It can be more three-dimensional. It's really down to you, the type of blend that you do from different profile as well, or at least it's like that in UK. So it's a bit of a poetic license behind it in terms of cream sherry category, I believe.
No, this is an American sherry, made with grapes from actually from California, I believe.
Are we allowed to say which one?
Yeah, Myers 44 is the sherry, the cream sherry.
Yeah.
Well, we should get a bottle of it over here, Michele, and have it in the club.
I actually want to have a bottle of that because I would like to try to find out, what sort of sherry they went for when they created Meyer 44. I know that Meyer 44 was the favorite sherry of the president. There's a lot of, marketing and legends behind, but I don't actually know what type of grapes they use and what type of blenders they use. It would be interesting to try to spot it, but I don't know it so well. Do you remember which president, Steve?
John F. Kennedy was his favorite. Yeah. It was Myers. It's not with a Y, it's with a M-I-E or E-I.
So just to answer the question, how sherry is made is one of the most complicated things in the world. Let's say then, So let's say then it's a fortified wine. Then you got two type of aging process. One is under the flow, and the flow is a thick layer of like yeast, let's say a fungus that is protect the wine from the oxygen. So there is that sort of aging, which is actually make it even more dry. And then when this layer of yeast break, if it naturally break, they even say then the palo es cortado because you break that flow and you got the oxidation of the wine, so make it even more aroma into it. And then you have Pedroximene, which is a sweet type of grape, which is harvested really late, so it's partially fermented, and it's already give you a sweet wine, but then sugar and glycerin is added to it before it go into aging. And obviously, the famous aging process of the, especially PX, is the Solera sherry, which is, another complicated sort of aging system. So it is a big world to explore, just to mention a few things.
So let's come back to Kentucky.
Yeah, of course.
So, we were just around Prohibition. So, and Joe and his sons going around. Joe is actually one of the founders of Heaven Hill, but he would go around to many distillers. I always say that after Prohibition, our family were the nomads because we didn't have our own distillery, so they would go around and be distillers at other distilleries. So it wasn't until we opened in 2010 at our side of the family, that the Joseph side of the family actually became distillers again. And it was very, very important for me to open a distillery. I didn't want to just have a brand. It would have been easier, to, just buy, source whiskey and do a brand. But it was very, very important for me to actually be a distiller. So look, fortunately, I had some friends in the business, so I worked with them, did tremendous amount of research. I had a very good friend whose family were generations of moonshiners, who he helped quite a bit, because what I found was that the people in the distilling business were very familiar with the large scale operations. But when you come down to a scale that we were operating on, and when we first started, our first mashes were 50 gallons. Now we do 600-gallon mashes. But when you do that scale, it's completely different than when you're at a larger scale. So him being a moonshiner and having a familiarity with the smaller scale really helped a lot with us getting started. So I was very grateful for that. And we started with an alembic still from Spain, a very basic still, and it's very tactile. Everything's done with by sight and taste and the smell. So it really, I say, you can make a decent bread with a bread maker, but you don't really learn how to make bread. So it was very important for me to learn the process and actually, make the adjustments on the still and everything. So that is where we started, with a 150-gallon alembic still, 600-gallon stripping still. We do 600-gallon mashes. The 600 gallons is a magic number because 600 gallons, we start and we'll have just about 1,000, just shy of 1,000 pounds of grain. And that will finish up to be just over one barrel of whiskey. So we start with our 600 gallons. We'll do a single pass through a pot still, and we'll end up with 125 gallons of low wine. So we start out at the distiller's beer is about 8 to 10% alcohol. The low wine is then about 25 to 30% alcohol. And then we'll run that through the alembic still for our finish. And we'll end up with about 1 barrel of whiskey at about 110 proof, 120, 115 proof. Our barrel entry is 107 proof. By law, everything in bourbon has to go in the barrel at 125 or below. Because they feel like as you get above 125, you're losing flavor. So they want to be 125 as the cutoff. It's an interesting thing. I just found out some of the big distilleries, and I guess when you're filling millions of barrels a year, it makes a difference. But they're filling the barrels at 125.2 because you're allowed, the TTB allows you 0.2 error. So they factor that in and add the 0.2 to the 125 proof. So I guess every bit helps. That's actually how we ended up with a 53-gallon barrel. The American standard barrel is 53 gallons. And before the 1962 law and regulation and everything, the barrels were really about 48 gallons, US gallons. And so the accountants got involved and they said, the barrel is one of the most expensive components of this whole process. If we could fit more liquid in that barrel, we could lower our costs. So 53-gallon barrel is the largest barrel that could fit in the existing rick houses. So that's why we have a 53-gallon barrel. If they could have fit 56-gallon barrel in there, we'd have 56-gallon barrels. But we ended up with the 53. So,
Sam wants to know if these whiskies are chill filtered. He seems to think
the minor case is not, because we once we dump it from the barrel, we bottle it. Yeah, we do the blending and bottle. The Yellowstone Select is very lightly chill filtered. And I guess we could get on to that tasting as well. I don't want to run over too much time here. But so Yellowstone, let me just talk a little bit about Yellowstone. Yellowstone, if you remember, I mentioned the Dant family. That was my mother's side of the family. And J.W. Dant started in 1836. And his son, Bernard Dant, opened a Cold Spring distillery in the 1850s. And he was making his bourbon. And then he had a salesman who was out west. And as the America had their first national park, Yellowstone, they decided to name the bourbon after the national park. So it was a marketing ploy. It was actually a kind of a genius marketing ploy. It quickly became their best-selling brand. In the 1960s and 70s, it was the best-selling bourbon in Kentucky. So yeah, and it was made also in Gethsemane, just right down the street down the railroad track from Minor Case Beams Distillery. And so Yellowstone is a blend of 4- and 7-year-old bourbon. And don't forget, in Kentucky, you know, we have the big weather changes and the temperature changes. So our bourbon ages a little bit more quickly than it does in Scotland, where it's a little bit more mellow or more even temperature, and you don't get those temperature swings that you get in Kentucky. So in Kentucky, in the summertime, in the barrel warehouses, it will be well over 100 degrees, and the liquid expands and goes into the barrel. And then in the summertime, in the wintertime, when it gets cold, and it can be, below 0 centigrade and actually below 0 Fahrenheit. And then the wood contracts and all that liquid comes back out. So that in and out pulls those flavors from the charring of the barrel back into the whiskey. And that's where all the color comes from. And we're not allowed to add any color to bourbon. It's just, the grain, the barrel, and water. That's all we can do with bourbon. If we finish, that's a whole nother story on top of that. But as far as additives or coloring, there's no coloring allowed. So this is a 93 proof 4- and 7-year-old bourbon. The 4-year-old gives you more the grain forward notes, and then the 7 is going to give you the lighter notes from the barrel. So you'll get for me, this is a very classic, very traditional Kentucky bourbon. It's you get the caramel and vanilla kind of toffee notes. When they char the barrel, they caramelize the sugars that are in the oak, and that's what's getting pulled in and out when the weather change.
Jackie has a question. Did you say when they started charring barrels and wine? Now, it was my understanding that it was to get rid of what had been in that cask before, and then it became popularized.
Yeah, there's a whole series of stories. No one really knows for sure. That they're saying, that people reuse cask, so they would char them so that they get rid of any smell or anything that was in there before. If you talk to the Elijah Craig people, they say his barn burned down and the inside just happened to get burned, and that's how it became charred. So that's a kind of dubious story, but
I've never heard that one before. That's great.
And then there's one that Mike Veach, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mike Veach. He's a bourbon historian here in Kentucky, and he tells a story that there were 2 French brothers in Louisville who were whiskey brokers, And he thinks that they may have started charring the barrel to make the whiskey, the bourbon, more like cognac, because cognac was the spirit of choice in New Orleans. And so he was thinking that they were doing this to kind of mimic that cognac to help sell their product. So that's another theory. So like I said, there's no shortage of theories on how the bourbon barrel got charred.
Fantastic. Well, that's two that I'd never heard of, so that's great. And then Laura Ann, a question about the cooperage. So where you get your barrels from? Okay,
so we get our barrels from Independent Stave Company, which is the main bourbon barrel producer there for Kentucky bourbon. They actually have a plant in the same city that we're located in, same small town. They make literally thousands and thousands of barrels every day. But we don't get our barrels from there. We get them from their plant in Missouri, because their plant in Missouri is a little bit more diverse. It makes wine barrels, it makes bourbon barrels, and it makes what we have. So all of a sudden I got kind of dark. I'm not sure what happened, but I guess the sun's going down or something. But so they make what they call a craft series barrel, and it's a better made barrel than what they're making in Kentucky. So we use an 18-month air dried stave, so that what they'll do is they'll cut the wood for the stave and set it on pallets outside for 18 months. And it gets rain and weathered, so it helps take the tannins out of that new wood. A lot of the barrels that are made now are kiln dried, so it's a big difference in the air dried. And so we use an air dried stave. We do a medium toast, so we toast the wood and then do a number 3 char over that. So the toasting of the wood, which is more common in wine, they build a small fire in the barrel. It's a longer process, and it heats the barrel up a little bit further in, but it just toasts that wood. And then the char comes along and just chars that outside. And so you intensify the flavors when you do a toast and then a char as well.
Can I ask a crass question, Steve?
Sure.
Well, you can probably guess what it's going to be based upon that comment. How much does it cost you to get a barrel? And then how much do you sell it on for after you've had your whiskey?
Well, the price has come down. There was a barrel shortage for a little while, but the price has come down. So we're still spending right at a couple $100 for a barrel. And used barrels 6-7 years ago, you could almost get the same for a used barrel, but now I see them for $50. So the price, because people are dumping so much more bourbon now, the barrels are getting more plentiful again. At one time, distilleries were paying people to haul the barrels off. So,
wow. I think that barrel there I bought off Boutique Dave for more than that.
Is that a little quarter cask, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a couple of them and I just cleaned one up. It looks bloody fantastic now.
Yeah, well, I tried to get the bung out of mine. They're impossible to get out. I was hoping there was going to be some Springbank in the bottom.
So for me, Yellowstone is just a very classic Kentucky bourbon. It's kind of what I remember being around our house. We always had Yellowstone in the house. It had just been recently sold out of the family, and we still had a lot of family who worked there. So it was, even though my dad's name, we always had a bottle of Jim Beam. My dad's name was Jim. So we always had a bottle of Jim Beam, but then we had the Yellowstone as well. But Yellowstone, like I said, been around since 1872. I noticed that somebody posted earlier that there were only a few distilleries open during Prohibition, and Yellowstone went through Prohibition. You could get a prescription for Yellowstone. They didn't actually have the distillery open, but it was licensed through Brown-Forman. So Brown-Forman became an agent for Yellowstone during Prohibition. After Prohibition, they built a massive plant with the tallest still in that was around, and it was sold out of our family in 1944, and then sold to Glenmore and the Thompson family. They had it until 1990, early 90s. They sold it to United Distillers, and United shortly thereafter merged with Guinness. This became Diageo. Diageo said they didn't want to have anything to do with this bourbon stuff. So they closed the plant down and sold off all the bourbon brands. And that's when Luxco acquired the Yellowstone brand in the 90s. And they had that up until they became our partners in 2015. And that's when, when they became partners, the intellectual property and we became responsible for Yellowstone at Limestone Branch. And so I reformulated it to what we're drinking today. And I'm I look at myself as a steward for the brand at this moment in time. There's a lot of Scotch brands that are very old, much older than this, but we've been around almost 150 years now. And so it's just this moment of time, I'm the steward for this brand. So and I just try to hand it off better than what I find it.
Well, it's absolutely superb.
It's 93 proof. That's what I chose to drink it neat, straight out of the bottle, maybe with just a drop or two of water. When we first introduced it, the sales reps came back and said, "Oh, you need to make it 100 proof. Everybody wants higher proof whiskey." So we readdressed it. I went back, but 93 is what I felt straight out of the bottle, into a glass is where it needed to be. So, so we kept it at 93, and I'm glad we did because it's been a good hit for us.
What's next, Steve? I mean, I know that it's 1795 to 2020, but what's 2021 and 2022 bring?
2021 and 22 will bring our bottled in bond. And for those of you who don't know what bottled in bond is, it means it has to be distilled from one distillery in one season as well, and at 100 proof. And what this is a blend of ours and source. So the bottled in bond will be 100% ours. And so this is actually a blend of pot still and column still. So it's almost like a blended Scotch where some is from a column and some is from a pot. But so this contains both distillates in there.
And that bottle in bond, will that be under the Yellowstone, or will it be?
Yes, it'd be under the Yellowstone label. We do some experimental things at the distillery that are available around Kentucky that are under the Limestone Branch label. And those are quarter casks that I try different things. We do different grains. Like that's where we do the 100% malted rye. We've done caramel malt, chocolate malt. We've done malted rye and malted wheat. We've started with what started that whole program was I found a recipe. A cousin brought an old book in from one of the dance desk, and he had a mash bill circled. And so it intrigued me, and it was 60% corn, 28% wheat, and 12% malt. So that was one of the highest wheated bourbons I had heard. So it intrigued me. So we put some in a quarter cask because I didn't want to wait so long to see how it was aging out. And everybody really enjoyed it. So we did put that into production into 53s as well. So that's probably more like 2024. We'll have the weeded bourbon out.
Wow. I look forward to that.
And our bottled and bond will be a 6-year bottled and bond. Legally, you can be a bottled and bond after 4, but I didn't feel it was ready at 4, so we waited to 6.
And that will be by far your highest ABV, the bottled and bond, or have some of your
the bottled and bond would be 100 proof.
Mm-hmm.
As that's where the bottled and bond needs to be. And the limited editions we do at 101.
Right.
Do some barrel picks that are available. Let me get this label. You may have some people who come to the States. I don't think it's available outside of the States now, but if you're ever in a liquor store and see this label,
Buy it.
it's a black label with the red Yellowstone on it. That is that means that the liquor store has come down to the distillery and picked the barrel out at the distillery, and then they can choose the proof at 102, 109, or 115. And so 115 would be our highest proof. And that's some really delicious whiskeys. So.
Amazing. Steve, do you mind if I open up for some questions from
Not at all.
members?
Be happy to answer any questions about the family or about Kentucky bourbon. You know, if I've missed things, I'm sure.
Guys, now's your chance. If anyone's got any questions, I know you've been firing them in the chat. We've been asking them as we go along, but unmute yourselves if you have anything to ask, Steve. We've covered it all.
Just, oh,
No, go ahead.
Mine was going to be frivolous. Discounts for bulk.
That's not my pay grade. That's at Michaela. You have to talk to Michaela about that.
Okay.
I just make it.
really-
I don't
really-
sell
Really nice whiskies. Thank you.
how
it. I can't make
excited
a
is
cocktail either. So I tell people, you know, I said I get it to the goal line, but it's you know the mixologist and the bartenders that need to take it and put it to wherever they, you know, there, because I can't get it there.
Okay.
Well, it's outside this chat. I'm happy to to help. We finding the product, and a good price and anything else, and make sure then look after you. But in this particular chat, I believe all the sales are directly to George. Then you can contact me through him on the side.
Thank you, mate.
Yes.
There might be something very interesting coming along kind of mid next year, Mr. White.
Can I ask what the grain mix is in the Yellowstone Select? I ask because although I know it's a bourbon, it does still have quite a lot of spice in it.
It's 75% corn, 13% rye, 12% malt. So rye would be the flavoring grain. I think 15% is considered a high rye. So we're almost there, but not quite a high rye bourbon.
Thank you.
And our distillate, we use a white corn as well. The larger distilleries and most distilleries use a number 2 dent yellow corn. One of the things when I was doing research of opening a distillery many years ago, I was reading an article from just after Prohibition, and it was a woman complaining about the new whiskey and how it had no flavor. And she said, but the corn just has no flavor anymore. Cornmeal doesn't taste like anything. And that got me thinking. And so when we opened the distillery, I wanted to start with an heirloom, open pollinated. So it's not a hybridized high production corn. It was grown for flavor. So we use a one called Boone County white. It's a little less of the corn flavor, a little bit more delicate, which I prefer.
When in the UK, say, in Scotland, for instance, if a distillery wants to use a specific type of barley, like for instance, Bruichladdich did bear barley, they have to ask farmers to specifically grow it for them. Do you do that, or is that white corn readily available?
The corn that we use is specifically grown for us. As a matter of fact, for the first 3 or 4 years, I had to buy the seed and get it to the farmer. So now at least they get their own seed. But yeah, so because it's harder to come by than just going to the local farm supply and getting the what everybody grows.
Are there any negatives in terms of yield, or?
It's much less yield, about 75% if you're lucky yield, maybe 50%. That is if you don't get a high wind and blow it down, because the older varieties tend to be taller, so they're more susceptible to be blown over by wind. They have to be spaced out a little different, further apart. So the yield is much less. But we pay the same for him to grow that he would get if he was growing the full yield.
Nice.
It's quite more expensive.
Laura-Ann, you had a question, or was it answered?
My question was, how involved is the next generation, or is the next generation too young?
No, I have some nephews who were involved in it. We'll see. Man, I'm holding out a little bit higher hopes for the second generation.
It's an amazing legacy.
Yeah, it was. It was for me. It was like I couldn't let that. If my brother and I would not have been involved in the distilling industry, we would have been the first generation since 1795 not involved. And it was just, I said, I couldn't let that happen on my watch. I'm going to hand it off to the next person. They can do what they want, but I'm not going to let it. That's bad karma.
Steve, do you see it as pressure or the opposite?
There is a lot of pressure in the beginning, to make a product that people liked and was respected. Actually, being respected by your peers, I think, is an important part. And so, we've won some awards. I've won some awards with things that I distilled. Some corn whiskey. Actually, we just did a gin, which has nothing to do with bourbon. But we just did a gin that won the best of show in the LA Spirits competition and platinum. So things like that allow it. And like I said, I just feel like I'm a steward for it at the time, and so I do my best. I make what I like, and I hope other people like that as well.
Well, we do. Well, I think I speak for everyone. I think it's incredible. Final question from Megan. What's in your gin?
What's in my gin? We have 17 different botanicals, many of which are your typical gin botanicals, cardamom and of course juniper, but then we do things that are specific to our site that grow. And we have 15 acres and this just grows on the site. So we have things like mulberry and blackberry and honeysuckle and ginseng that are included in the gin as well.
Amazing.
It's a very light and aromatic gin. It could be overpowered very easily with tonic. I think it's great, as a sipper, by itself. But I used 2 different gin baskets. I used one that's higher up in the column, and it captures those aromatics as they come off, right as they come off, and so it's very light and fruity and aromatic.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that has been absolutely incredible. Michele, have you anything to add, mate?
Yeah, I just wanted to just in case, I would like, if it's actually possible, to share my screen and to show some picture that I took of the distillery, just to see what we're talking about, because I personally didn't believe the first time that I was there that was the real distillery, and I wasn't working for the brand yet. It's the tiniest little thing I ever saw, and I'm a fan of bourbon, so I'm actually like to discover small production and such. There are probably
I said we're very efficient with our space.
Yeah. And I'm sure that there might be some some distillery up there that do about 1 barrel a day. Well, they like to say 2 barrels a day. The truth is in the middle. It's actually 400 barrels in 1 year, so I'm more close. But I believe there are other distilleries that do that, but they don't really export outside Kentucky or outside US. This is as a bottle. It's the only bottle, I believe. Then we're talking about a postil, a 1 barrel a day, and well, of course, it's the only bottle then you can find the signature bean in the back. But the distillery is something magical, and so if you guys are interested, I would like to share the screen just to show what I saw, and hopefully one day you can go there and try yourself. Also, if you go to the distillery, I got this one here. There was one that was open, that's finished. This is the one that I keep closed. Those one are bottled that you can only buy at the distillery. Those are part of the experimental quarter cask, which in one of the quarter cask, one of the experimental steam beam, I try my favorite rye, which is a shame that it's only a quarter cask, which the 100% malted rye, which is something just crazy. And also, it's an experience that if you like enough, and Steve is in the good mood, you can actually, as I did, kind of drill one of the casks and get your own sample. This is actually chocolate malt, but it's incredible. Definitely, if you're in Kentucky, you have to, you must see that distillery. So, is that okay with you guys if I show a bit what I saw? Yeah. Cool. So let me just.
I'm surprised you didn't say that, Michele, because you usually get after me. But our yeast that we use was captured from a donor jug that my grandfather had used, and so they were able to go in. We scraped the jug, and we got the DNA of the yeast. Then from the DNA, the scientists put it into some bacteria. It's way over my pay grade, but anyway, we use the same yeast strain that was in the yeast jug that my grandfather used to carry home. That's Eric, our lead distiller. So
it's actually something that I was about to to bring it up, and I'm glad that it came from you, because every time that I say that, it sounds like it sounds ridiculous, but it is true. I saw the jar, and what is incredible then, with the technology that we only have today, we will be able to to match that DNA with the DNA existing in the atmosphere today, which is pretty much make it as close as possible to the original bean mash, from the very first bean, because we don't know before minor case that the yeast jar for how many generations it's been passed on.
Right.
Is that correct?
That they were very proud of the yeast and passed it from generation to generation. We know it goes back to minor case. Not sure if it goes back to Jack and then on back to Jacob, but we do know it goes back at least to the early 1800s.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys can see the screen.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
We can.
Okay. So this guy here is well, it's a distiller as well in the Limestone Branch. It's called Char, right? Sorry, it's called Chase.
Eric, that's Eric.
Eric, sorry. This one here was when I saw filling up the barrel, and that was it. That was job done for today. Those are the fermentation tank.
600 gallons.
Yeah. So it should be about 3,000 liter, if I'm not wrong, in terms of, you know, my calculation. Again, I'm not really great on math, but I kind of comparing this with the Locks Row Distillery, which is another one that I represent. In the Locks Row, for instance, we have 15 of 15,000 liter. This one here are 6 of 3,000 liter. So it's already, you know, it's ridiculously small, respect the majority of the production. The Locks Row is not even one of the biggest, to be fair. But, you know, this is it. You know, this is actually a picture of the whole distillery. You know, that's pretty much everything. Also, you know, obviously the fermentation, you know, is like open air. This type of distillery, and again, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but is still the old-fashioned way, you know, trying the mash. You know, there is no like fancy technology. There is no a chemist laboratory behind, you know, with big screen and anything like that. You know, you just
we do a sour mash process. So using some of the prior stillage, we distill on the grain. So the grain, we don't do a wash. The corn and the grain is still in the fermentation.
so this is Cork. This is the cat of the distillery.
That's Cat. He's the in charge. But that's, you know, each distillery.
Not the one being mixed.
To have its own microflora, and the open air fermentations, you know, allow that to come in. So you're going to have each distillery is going to have its footprint as well. I recognize that hand.
Yeah. So this one here is actually the still.
The finished still. That's the condenser.
And yeah, you know, yeah. Well, that's the condenser, but you know, that's the apostille. That's, you know, every drop, you know, of whiskey on the limestone branch is come from there. You know, there are no a huge column or anything like that. If you see the dimension, you know, it's like if me and Steve hug each other, that, you know, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, it's 500 liter still for the finish. So we do a 600 for the stripping and 500 liter for the finish.
I think, honestly, I think it's incredible. You know, consider there is a bourbon whiskey production, and I know then there are, you know, three barrel of whiskey that are aging for every American citizen. So the demand is quite huge. You know, I think it's just crazy. Also, just for you guys for reference, we did the Limestone Branch Distillery tour, which is on my YouTube channel. But what we did, we invite a bartender to ask questions to Steve Beam, and you know, he answered from the distillery, which is give you more an idea of you know, the brands. And this is, for instance, this is the East jug. Then you know, we were talking about, and you get quite more detailed. You know, of course, it's like you know, you're actually inside the distillery, and you know, you see step by step the production. You know, the tasting room and everything, and it's, you know, it's just magical. I will share the link as well in the chat. But you know, I just wanted to, you know, to bring that up because I think it's quite something.
Well, that was a fantastic and fitting way to finish, to see the distillery. Steve, that was a masterclass in the truest sense of the word. I genuinely cannot think of anybody better to go deep into the history of whiskey in Kentucky and America. You're a great man, and I genuinely appreciate you coming and giving us this session, mate. It's very generous of you to give us your time. I know that you're with your family in Florida, so thank you so very, very much, mate. It was just so cool, and I learned a lot, and I'm sure that lots of us have. Thank you very much, Steve.
Well, like I said, I appreciate you having me. I love to talk about the family and actually southeastern Nelson County distillery. So I'm pretty specific with my knowledge, but yeah, so Kentucky bourbon and everything like that. That's so whenever I can have an audience, that's great to be able to talk.
No, thank you so very much. And yeah, please, the next time you're in London, come and see us. And guys, whenever you're in Kentucky next, hopefully it won't be too long, get yourselves over there.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. We do tours every day of the week. We're open 9 to 5. We're doing tours now, even now. We're scaled way back to just 6 people per tour, you know, every hour. So, but we are still operating, at least for now. We'll see if that holds out. Yeah, hopefully this will be over soon.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Well, we've got a fantastic year ahead of us in terms of we're going to have both of these whiskies as stalwarts on the bar. Hopefully we might get a couple of bottles of the special Yellowstone as well, the limited edition. And we're going to have some brilliant tastings with Michele. Michele, thank you very much for organizing this, mate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you absolutely for having us. You know, I really appreciate that. Thank you all of you guys for being here.
And thank you for joining, guys. Steve, happy Thanksgiving, sir.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
George.
Yeah, usually this time of year I'm over in London because I usually piggyback it with the trip to the bar convent in Berlin. So either before or after I'm usually there. I know I've been in London many times on Halloween. So
amazing. Thank you so much, guys. All the very best.
Thank you for everybody coming. I appreciate it.
Anybody fancy a quick song before you go?
Yeah.
Song?
Hell yeah.
Was that a hell yeah?
Hell yes.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Oh, okay.
This is
I hope you can remember the words. It's been a while since I sang this one. This is a song about bourbon, and it's called Bourbon and Blues.
good name, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Tim.
You are welcome, Mr. All of you, and Mrs. I don't mean Mrs. I mean the plural Mrs. Yeah, forget it. Hope I can remember the words. Bourbon and blues coming at you now. Bourbon and blues, they go together like a new pair of shoes. Bourbon and blues, they go together like a new pair of shoes. You don't need an excuse to fix yourself some bourbon and blues. Bourbon and blues, they go together like gander and goose. Ha! Bourbon and blues, they go together like gander and goose. Now you know what to do. Go mix yourself some bourbon and blues. Well, I went up Heaven Hill, I fell down Knob Creek. The whiskey tasted so fine, the water tasted bad for a week. Well, I've forgotten what this line is, but let me tell you, if the buffalo don't get you, then the wild turkey will. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bourbon and blues, they go together like dynamite and fuse. Bourbon and blues, they go together like dynamite and fuse. You don't need an excuse to fix yourself some bourbon and blues. Let's hope we get this bridge right. Well, I knocked on heaven's door and I heard Bob sing. I traced the buffalo all the way to the spring. I rode the whistle pig and I didn't fall off. But you gotta bite the bullet if to be in with a shot. If you get my meaning. Bourbon and blues, they go together like a new pair of shoes. Yeah, bourbon and blues, they go together like a new pair of shoes. You don't need an excuse to fix yourself some. Now you know what to do. Go ahead and mix yourself some. Said you don't need no excuse. Fix yourself some bourbon and blues.
Bravo!
Thank you very much. And thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, no,
Mr.
thank
Tim,
you.
we will need to add the 2 lines, one for Yellowstone and one for Minor Case.
Yeah, we'll have to get some Yellowstone in there as well. It's hard to
Yeah.
fit them all in. The line I forgot was something about meeting Jim Beam and drinking from the still.
Well,
Because if the eagle don't get you, then the wild turkey will. That was the one I got wrong, but it's been a while since I sang that one. But there we go.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Steve, and thank you all. It's great fun. Always to be here.
Steve, thank you so much. Everybody, thanks for joining. And back next week for not a masterclass, but tasting that I hope will be a pretty decent one too. But Steve, thank you so much.